All right. Good evening, folks. Welcome to the Nick and Joe Show. I'm Nick. He's Joe. He's in Ottawa, and I'm up here in Sioux Lookout. Boy, I'll tell you, it was, I got to tell you just real fast, Joseph, about the trip back from the valley. Everything was going fine. It was it was almost 80 degrees when we were down there over the Easter weekend. It was just gorgeous. The snow was going away, that everything was just wonderful. I walked around in a t-shirt and just, you know, enjoying the weather and meeting up with some friends and catching up with family. And we had the luxury of taking a few extra days to make sure everybody was good and sick of us before we went back. And then it came time to leave, so we packed up the truck and we moved to Beverly. Some of us older folks will recognize that line. Not quite.
Hills, that is.
That's right. Movie star. Anyway, forget it. That's
Beverly
Hills. Who are
Hills.
under 50, you're not going to get that.
Something, and then movie stars. I can't remember what it was.
Um,
Hollywood. Beverly Hills, that is. Hollywood movie stars.
That's right.
That was it.
Anyway, what a great show that was. Who didn't like Ma Clampett? Anyway, or Granny, I should say.
Granny.
Granny, that's right. Granny, Jed and Granny and Ellie Mae and what was Jethro.
Jethro. It was Jethro.
Yes, Jethro.
Yeah, that's it.
Anyway, we're going down memory lane for a lot of people. They have no memory of it all because nobody has ever watched the Beverly Hillbillies. Certainly, all the cast members. I don't know if Max Bayers is dead yet, but he was one of the last remaining ones alive. Granny's long gone. Jed's long gone. Mr. Drysdale's long gone. Jane Hathaway's gone. The actors who portrayed them are all gone. Except I think Max might still be alive. He'd be well into his 80s by now. And the last I heard of him, he was running a bar in Florida. And he didn't have much of a career after the Hillbillies was over. I saw him, I think, in one movie after that, and that was about it. Anyway, set that aside.
You get typecast. That's the problem, right?
What's that?
You get typecast. That's the problem.
Yeah, that's true. And that happened to him.
Yeah.
Because he was always seen as this big buffoon and a lovable character. But anyway, I watched him once when I was watching one of their episodes. He came downstairs. This was in a complete goalie outfit, mask, pads, gloves, everything with a great big king crest on his chest. I didn't think the LA Kings were a thing at the time when he did it, but he said, Uncle Jed, no woman's going to want to get, even if they're hugging and squeezing on me, I can't feel it. Yeah, you're right. So anyway, we packed up and we headed back up here, and we got all the way up to Wawa, and we stayed at a really nice motel. If anybody ever travels up this way and you need a place to stay up in that neck of the woods, I would highly recommend the High Falls Motel and Resort. Very comfortable, very reasonable, nice rooms. It's got a signed photograph of Ted Nugent on the wall. Now, I am not a Ted Nugent music fan. I really enjoy his politics, but from a musical point of view, he's not my cup of tea. However, before COVID, he would come up there twice a year, just sit in the corner, like he'd come for the fishing and the hunting and all that stuff. But when he wasn't doing that, he'd sit in the corner of the office and talk to the hotel manager ad nauseum, just on and on and on. She loved it. So he left her a signed copy. So it was good enough for Ted Nugent. It was good enough for me. Anyway, when we left there, we knew the weather was going south. And the further we went, we were pushing it. We said, well, let's get to Thunder Bay and see what it's like there. We get to Thunder Bay. Okay, what's it like? Can we get to Ignace? And, car keys, coat. My wife is giving me signals from the door. I believe they're in there. Anyway, so we're just watching the weather, and we decided, okay, look, we can either spend the night, one more night on the road and come home the following day, or we can try and make it home tonight, because we had everything we needed in the truck in case we got stuck. We had food, we had water, we had blankets. We're all set, so we weren't worried about that, and I had almost a full tank of gas. We get to about an hour south of Sioux Lookout, and traffic just stops. 2-lane highway, no alternatives. And the lineup is measured in leagues, not miles. It's just ridiculous. We sat there for over 5 hours. Now, there is a tragedy to this because about 2 people died in the accident that caused the stoppage. And I have a friend of mine who is a member of the OPP, and we were talking to him about accidents in this area. And he says, the tragedy is exactly that. That is bad enough that people get killed. Traffic just comes to a halt, and there's no way to get around it. So you just sit there until, if there's an investigation, it's over, or until they get the wreckage pulled away and let people go through, whatever it is. We didn't get home till after midnight. So we were pretty much tuckered by the end of the day. However, we have bounced back and everything's fine. So that was the trip home. But sitting in that truck thinking, because we did that one before when we went to Winnipeg on a trip to the coast, we sat there for 9 hours. So this was mercifully shorter than that. But I've been down that road and I don't want to go down that road anymore. I'm tired of doing that. But what are you going to do?
Well,
Oh,
Nick, you raise an interesting point, and I know that we had not planned on discussing this, but hey, part of the fun of this particular show is that we get to
yeah,
talk about whatever we want whenever we want to talk about it.
right.
And most often that doesn't include what we planned on talking about. Uh,
Sometimes you never get to it.
quite, but on this subject, it really does raise an important question, and that is why we are not investing money in building a proper Trans Canada highway system, similar to what the Americans did in the 1950s and early 60s when they built the interstate network.
Mhm.
And that's not a guarantee that you're going to have an accident or you won't have an accident that blocks the traffic, but it certainly would make a lot more sense. And there are a lot of areas where the Trans Canada Highway is in fact a divided highway, but
Mhm.
most of it isn't. And for the life of me, I can't understand, because to me this is actually one of the important functions of government, is
Yeah.
providing some kind of an infrastructure. And you ask yourself two questions: how much trade, okay, what is the dollar value of lost time by vehicles that are involved in delivery, etc., when they're sitting in traffic in a situation like this?
Right.
That's in lost time. But the second thing is this: for all of you environmentalists out there, and we're going to poke fun, I'm sure, throughout the evening at the fact that yesterday was Earth Day. But for all of you environmentalists out there, ask yourself how much greenhouse gas is emitted into the atmosphere on a cold day, a relatively cold day, not freezing or anything, but not the kind of day where you're going to sit for 5 hours with the windows open in your truck and the engine off. Okay. So you're going to run your truck or your car or whatever it is, and or your RV. At this time of the road, you're starting to see some RVs on the road,
Yeah,
uh,
there's a lot.
and and it to me, from simply an environmental point of view, it really doesn't make sense. We ought to have that highway system built, and this is not a new thing. Gosh, I remember, boy, the first time that I drove. I didn't personally drive. I actually went with family from Ottawa to Alberta.
Right.
Was probably ooh, 66, 67, thereabouts. And I remember them building the highway at that time, and a few more trips where they were building the highway, but they were not building it as a divided highway. They were just upgrading what was a 2-lane highway and then adding in sections, as you know, because you've driven that stretch quite a few times now. There were sections where they have 3 lanes, okay, and one of them is a passing lane,
Right.
and so the idea
Thank
being
God
that
for
we're going
those.
to give cars the opportunity to get through traffic a little bit better, speed up a little bit from time to time, because you're going to have trucks in that on that road that are going to be driving under the speed limit. Okay, so
Especially going
all of
forward.
this makes sense, but I don't understand. It's a question of priorities, I think. And when I look at the kind of money that we spend in this country, that the federal government spends, and this would be essentially a federal government project. They might do it in collaboration with the provinces, but given the fact that it would be a national highway, it seems to me that this would be predominantly a federal project. But we don't spend money on it. We'll spend billions of dollars on all kinds of nonsense. Okay, the CBC. Not that I want to spend the time on the show today talking about the CBC, but imagine if we were spending some of that money on actually building an infrastructure that gives opportunity for communities to continue to engage in commerce, not just within their own local communities, but to be able to move goods and services larger distances more efficiently, more quickly. Good for the environment, good for business, good for everybody.
I couldn't agree more. Now, to be fair, if anyone wants to take a look at what they're dealing with, trying to put in a 4-lane highway where only a 2-lane exists at the moment, do a Google Earth and search the Kenora area and say to yourself, okay, if I'm going to put down 4 lanes of traffic, where am I going to put it?
Well,
the cost, because it's like somebody took a shotgun, fired at a sheet of paper and said, okay, those are all lakes. And now you got to put a road through there.
Yeah.
So but there are some geographical challenges that come with that, but I'm not making that excuse. I'm not saying, well, that excuses everything, because look, they've been building that highway since, as you pointed out, the 1960s. They're still working on it. The last time we went through there, they are blasting and they had blast mats in place. And so but part of it, I think, and I don't have any evidence to back this up, but it would seem to me to be rather convenient for the government and its favorite contractors. And I'm not accusing anybody of anything. I don't have any contract. I'm not thinking of any particular contractor under any circumstances, but it would seem that to make this project last and to have revenue again come in is in the contractor's benefit, because he knows the government's going to pay the bills, even if it's a year late. He knows he can count on it. So he's going to drag this out as long as possible. And that is the kind of thing, if you said to them, you want to see do what the Americans did in 1989 when the LA earthquake took place and the highway collapsed. It was 2-lane, one on top of the other, and it collapsed. The guy who rebuilt it built his own railway because the highway system and the railway system that was there wasn't efficient enough. He was going to make, I think it was $1 million a day for every day he came in ahead of the contract date. So there was incentive for him to go out and get this done as fast and as, meeting the different milestones. I'm not just saying throw him up paper mache, but he had to meet milestones and quality, make sure the quality was high. But for every day he came in early, he made an extra $1 million on the contract. Why don't we do that?
Well, I'm sure that there's nothing nefarious going on, Nick. I just think it's poor management on the side of the government and just not making this a priority. So much of what we have that we're not doing is just a matter of lack of political will. It's not for lack of money. We seem to have enough money to just throw around at everything on an urgent basis if it's required. It just seems to me that this is a fundamental, basic task of government, responsibility of government, is to provide this kind of communication infrastructure. And unfortunately, successive governments, provincial, federal, conservative, and liberal, have failed repeatedly to step up to the plate. And I guess there just aren't enough votes in Northern Ontario. That's the only thing I could think of. Because when you look at the kind of infrastructure spending, the dollars that get spent in the city of Toronto and in the Toronto region, and then you look at the kind of money that's spent on building roads or improving the road system in Northern Ontario, I mean, there's just they don't even come close to comparing. Nick, we got to go for a quick break.
Yep.
Okay, so we'll be back in a minute here on the Nick and Joe Show. Stay with us.
We all know that climate change is real. But with countries like China and India failing to do their part, what Canadians need now more than ever is a Made in Canada climate change plan. A real plan that responds to the real-world needs of Canadians. a balanced plan that supports responsible economic growth and strengthens our essential infrastructure. A responsible plan that protects our natural environment and ensures that all Canadians enjoy the blessings of clean air, clean land, and clean water for generations to come. It's time for Canadian politicians to show real leadership in the world, putting partisanship and ideology aside. It's time for a sensible climate plan. We're the International Climate Science Coalition Canada, and we're ready to help. To learn more, visit our website, icsc-canada.com.
Who says you can't turn the clock back? Experience the excitement of open-air flying and see Canada's National Capital Region like you've never seen it before from the open cockpit of a vintage 1930s biplane. Are you up for the adventure? Put on your helmet and goggles and strap yourself in. Book your flight today. Go to OttawaBiplaneAdventures.com. That's OttawaBiplaneAdventures.com. Ottawa Biplane Adventures. The adventure begins here.
Oh my gosh, that was so exciting! I gotta do it again.
All right, welcome back to the Nick and Joe Show, folks. We are hosts. I am Nick, he is Joseph, and we are discussing pretty much anything that crosses our over-imaginative and fertile minds. We were talking about infrastructure before we took the break, and just to kind of wrap this up, you're right about, of course, the disparity. Now, I understand why on one level. There's 5 million people that live in Toronto, okay? However, up here, the argument should be not so much about, well, nobody lives up here, so why should we spend money? It's the east-west trade route between BC and Nova Scotia. If you don't have that, like this is one of the reasons why inter-provincial trade is so difficult. Or even if you want to swing down out of Calgary or out of Manitoba and go into the States, because there's a lot of products and products and so on that come out of the prairie provinces as well, grain, oil, you name it, that need to be transported. And sometimes those have to go east. Like if you want to go to Chicago, let's say you take a truckload of grain to Chicago, you need that route, or you go through the States. And if you remember when Kathleen Wynne cut a ribbon on a bridge, which I have been over that bridge 4 or 5 times now. And it's a beautiful bridge. It's a lovely bridge. It really is. The problem is she cut the ribbon in springtime, and when winter came, it had not been built right, and the changing of the steel, because as it shrinks and expands with heat and frost, popped it up about 18 inches and shut that bridge down. Thankfully, nobody was killed, but shut that down for months. And people had to reroute around it for 17 hours to get around it because there was no other way. So there's a real reason for federal dollars to work and maintain on putting in proper infrastructure so the country can function.
Right. And the only final observation that I would make on this, Nick, is in response to your comment about how you understand that, there are somewhere around 5 million people in the Toronto area and not very many people up in Northern Ontario. And that is true. But one of the reasons why we don't have more people living in Northern Ontario is because of the transportation and infrastructure grid.
Yeah, the weather has nothing to do with it.
Weather might have some to do with it, okay?
Kidding.
But I don't want to oversimplify it. I'm not saying that infrastructure is the only thing that's missing, but let's face facts, okay? I would be more inclined to live in northwestern Ontario if I knew that I wouldn't have to at least once a week spend 5 or 6 hours on the highway sitting doing nothing because there had been some sort of an accident. It's as simple as that. And it doesn't have to be a serious accident so instead of waiting 5 hours, I'm delayed 1 hour. And we would never, in Toronto or in Ottawa or in any of the other population centers, we would not tolerate that kind of regular delay on major thoroughfares, and for good reason.
Yeah, you're making a good point. One of the things that I want to shift over to another topic, just because we don't have time to really launch into an in-depth topic. We'll do that after the bottom of the hour. But I've been watching a lot of hockey this year. I've been watching my Leafs keep me pulling my hair out, especially last night against Tampa. I mean, I'm glad they won, but come on, guys, can't you just beat them 6-2 and be done with it, and be in control of the game right from beginning to end? No, that's not the way it played. But
Well, they wouldn't be the Toronto Maple Leafs if they did.
oh God. Anyway, I wanted to talk about the sport a little more generally than that, because sport is an important part of life. It's an important factor. It brings great joy to people. It really wrings you out emotionally, especially when you are concentrating on the elite levels of the game. I mean, let's face it, if you're watching a team of bantams play for their championship, to the kids and the parents, it means a lot. But on a national scale, there's all kinds of tournaments going on around the world. But when you're watching the NHL, the best league in the world, the best athletes in the world, the hardest trophy to win, especially considering how many Canadians, and I think there's a lot of justification for this, believe, as I do, that hockey is the world's greatest game. And it's also Canadian in origin, and still the majority of players come from Canada. And it really brings people together in a way I don't think any other sport can. I mean, yes, and I'm not knocking the other sports, basketball, baseball, foosball, soccer. Oh man, soccer, I don't understand. I don't know why people get so wound up in it. It's so boring. I mean, anyway, that's my personal take. If you like soccer, great, go watch it. I'm not going to tell you not to, but if you could watch hockey, why would you watch soccer? There's so much more going on. It's so much faster. It's so much more entertaining. And I just think that the game itself lends itself to all the attributes that it takes to be a really good person. And this is true of sports in general, team sports now, because there's self-sacrifice, there is commitment, there is playing as part of a team, there's setting goals and achieving those goals. All these things are character building. And it's something that I think we sometimes overlook, how valuable that is when it comes to the kind of things that matter in everyday life. And yeah, okay, there are a lot of people who get, overboard on it, like go to a junior A game and watch parents screaming at the refs or the coach because you didn't play little Johnny often enough, or that was no call. You shouldn't have called my son for hooking on this play or whatever. There's always going to be those people. But in general, you go to a hockey game to be entertained and to watch the very best of the best game in the world. And those are the reasons I think that hockey as a sport is unparalleled. There's no other game out there that requires the level of courage, skill, strength, speed, all these things that are necessary to play this game at that level. And that's what puts it head and shoulders above every other game on the planet.
Well, of course,
Absolutely.
that's a subjective observation. But yeah, I certainly, I'm not going to argue your points about soccer, aka football, not North American football, but I find it very slow, and I've always been a little astonished at and perplexed at the popularity of that particular sport around the world. But it is extremely popular. There's no question about it. I, of course, am a rugby player, or was a rugby player for a number of years. Rugby union, not rugby league, for those of you who understand the difference. But in particular in Canada, it's an interesting topic because it really is, people don't really know this, but the official national sport of Canada, it's lacrosse. It's actually not hockey, and which is that's kind of surprising.
But to be honest, Joseph,
would change that.
Lacrosse is hockey and sneakers.
Well, okay, and broomball is hockey and sponge
or on
sneakers,
a field.
Okay. Okay, well, hockey originally was played on a field, Okay, it's hockey was not originally played on ice. Field hockey, we
Yeah,
call it field hockey here, but
that's
everywhere
because I
else
don't
it's
know any better.
hockey. I, yeah. Anyway, yeah, it's almost like at this time of the year, it's almost like a religion now here in Canada. And uh, now, Nick, tell me whether I'm wrong though. Okay, has it? I know you're a big hockey fan and even an aficionado. My question is this: am I wrong in making the observation that it's lost a little bit of its popularity? That to a certain degree it's been
I
replaced
think
by
the
other
thing,
sports. It's still immensely popular, don't get me wrong, but you just for a lot of reasons, I just don't sense the same kind of excitement. I remember kids playing hockey, with a piece of
Mhm.
ice in the schoolyard. You'd set up the goalposts with two big pieces of snow or ice, and then you'd be running around kicking another small piece of ice around, and that was like the hockey puck. And and people would be going, "Oh, I pretending, oh, I'm Esposito," and the Esposito brothers, Tony and Nets and Phil
Right.
playing center, right? And so I saw a lot of this stuff and grew up with a lot of this stuff around me, but I don't know. I don't. People just kids don't seem to
The
be
reason I
into it
think
that
there's a
much
couple of
anymore.
reasons. First of all, to get involved in hockey in a competitive way is a very expensive um, proposition. How many parents have pretty much sold? I hate to, and when I say this, I mean it, tongue a little bit tongue in cheek. Sold their soul to make sure a little Johnny or little Susie,
Well, certainly
or at
mortgage
least on
mortgage the
that.
house.
Part of it is because they're hoping that their prodigy is going to be the next Austin Matthews and make their life really easy with an $11 million a year contract. Okay. So they wait 15, 20
Mm,
years to get there. But no,
that's pretty
I don't
cynical.
think, I think there's parents out there who think that way. Okay. Are they the majority of
Okay.
them? I doubt it. I think most people are far more reasonable than that because most of the kids who lace up skates every day and go out and play a game they're passionate about know they're not going to make the NHL. Okay. And the kids figure it out pretty fast too, because the ones who are the talented ones go blowing by them and they just, they're just the whole point about any sport is to have fun. Now, the other reason
Right.
why is because you have this rise in interest in games like soccer at the school level. Okay. They don't, to have a hockey team, first of all, at school, try to start a game of shinny in the schoolyard without some teacher shutting it down because of the insurance risks,
Yeah, that's
the
true.
liability. There's communities out there who
Of
will
course,
not
yeah.
let kids play street hockey. I grew up on that stuff. The world famous war cry was car, and you'd have to stop the game, let the car drive through, and then you carry on with the game again. Those things have been taken out. So there's no opportunity for these kids to develop a passion, even if they're not going to make the NHL, to think, like a hockey player, to pretend that they're Bobby Orr or Phyllis Esposito or Austin Matthews, or pick whoever your favorite player is. Okay, Ovechkin or what's the guy from Nova Scotia, Cole Harbor? Oh, come on, plays for the Penguins. Thank you, Chris Crosby.
Crosby.
Anyway, Sid Crosby.
Sid
That's right.
Sid Crosby.
Now, so what you end up with is a group of people who have the funds available, but that group is shrinking. So you get the very best of the people who can afford to put their kids in hockey. There's a lot of kids out there who probably are very skilled, but their parents, like I never played hockey as a kid. I can barely skate. Why? Because my parents could not afford to put me in skates and put me in a league, even back in the 60s. Talk about broke. But anyway, so, and I think that's what's playing into it. But I also think the NHL and hockey in general could do a lot about that if they so chose.
All right. Bottom of the hour, we've got to take a 2-minute break. So stick with us, ladies and gentlemen. We'll be back here on the Nick and Joe Show.
Ice cream. Give me ice cream with whipped cream. Ice cream. Give me ice cream with whipped cream. Ice cream. A million flavors, let's just do it. Tie me up with ice cream. Sunny days need that cold hit. Ice cream. A million flavors, let's just do it. Tie me up with ice cream. Sunny days need that cold hit. That strawberry chocolate taste. High school vanilla for me. Hundreds and thousands. I need an ice cream island. Give me ice cream with whipped cream. Strawberry sauce. And see my face gleam. I need a wafer on top. Just ice cream full stop. So take me to the pudding shop. Ice cream. A million flavors, let's just do it. Tie me up with ice cream. Sunny days need that cold hit. Ice cream. A million flavors, let's just do it. Tie me up with ice cream. Sunny days need that cold hit. That strawberry chocolate taste.
There is just a feeling that this might be right for us, for you and me. There is just a look I think this might be right for us, for you and me. There is just a feeling that this might be right for us, for you and me. There is just a look I think this might.
Yes, we
We're
are.
back.
And I'm cursing myself because I'm trying to type in a little backroom chat here. But where we want to go next. I think the topic we have to talk about, Joseph, this, I can't believe it. This blows my mind. The Public Workers Union, there are two of them. I can't remember their names right off.
Well, more than two, but the one that's on strike is the one I think you're probably referring to, the
That
Public
one.
Service
There's
Alliance in
another one
Canada.
too. They want like 13% over 3 years, and the other one wants over 20% over 5 or something like that. And I saw this, and this is
Yeah.
going to lay everything from tax returns to passports, which I am in the middle of getting. But these people, the people who thought this going on strike was a good idea, need to have their heads examined. First of all, they should be, bite your tongue, they should be grateful to have a job, especially one that pays as well with the benefits that they already have. They were offered 9% and they turned it down. 9%. That's
Over 3 years?
I'm going to say no, I don't think so, per year. Well,
Well, it wouldn't be
so
per
is
year. That's
13
an
and
awful
20
lot.
and 20. So let's say it is over 3 years. That's still 9%. But think about this. We have people in this
Yeah.
country, okay, who are paying their taxes, who can't feed themselves and are going to food banks. And even if they're not paying income taxes, they're still paying sales tax. If they're the working poor and they got to go to work, they got to put gas in the car. There's taxes on that. Everything you do has a tax attached to it. So they can't say they don't pay taxes. They do. There's no question about it. They might not pay income tax the way people in a higher income bracket do, but we all pay taxes. And these guys are so disconnected that they actually feel they also want they want the right to work from home enshrined in any future collective agreement. What are you, crazy? This was supposed to be something we did during the COVID crisis just so nobody got sick. It was never meant to be a long-term proposal. Now, at the same time, I don't mind if somebody gets a job and part of that job is you get to work from home. All right, fine. But to enshrine it as a collective bargaining part of the collective bargaining, as if nothing will ever change and that's it, man. If you can sit in your front of your computer at home, then there's no reason for you to. How do we know they're actually doing anything? There's an old joke that says, "How do you know a public service? Why doesn't a public servant look at the window in the morning?" And the answer is because he needs something to do in the afternoon. And yeah, it's funny, but at the same time,
I hadn't heard
you
that
haven't
one.
heard that? Oh, that's as old as the hills, Joseph.
I'm afraid
Anyway,
I haven't.
there's a certain grain of truth to it. And I'm painting with a broad brush. I know it because there's a lot of people out there who work very hard in our public service and who, but it's the union leadership. It's the fact that government would ever entertain this. They should take if we had any kind of leadership at all in Ottawa, they should do the Ronald Reagan thing that he did back in the 1980s with the air traffic controllers. Oh, you don't want to work? Guess what? You're fired. And fired a lot of them.
Wow.
And just open up the door and say, who wants $30 an hour? Come on in and do the job. Here are the working conditions. There you go. And they won't do it. Now, so these people are demanding things that the public wouldn't, for the most part, in general, in the private sector, wouldn't even dream of asking for. And these clowns go on strike for somewhere between 13 and 20%. Are they out of their ever-living minds? If I was a member of that union, I would be embarrassed. Because if you can't figure out the kind of economic pain this country is in with gas taxes and just the cost of energy, the cost of food, the cost of housing, the cost of groceries, well, that's food. So all these things piled together are making it really difficult for the average Canadian to get by. And they want 15%? They're out of their minds. As if I need to. Okay. I'll let you have a go at it now.
Well, I'm just letting you get it all off.
Go on for hours, but I think you get the point.
Right. Well, look, I confess, Nick, that I don't know precisely what their wage demands are. But let's unpack the everything that you've said a little bit and try to address everything one step at a time. The first thing is this, okay? Let's just talk for a second about the work from home situation. I tend to agree with you. I don't think that it's worth. I don't think that anybody should be writing into a collective bargaining agreement a right to work from home. I think that that's something that should not be put into the contract. On the other hand, I am in favor of working from home. I'm actually a very big fan of what's called telecommuting. And telecommuting is not new. It's been in practice in the private sector for a long time now. And it's, again, the fact that the federal government only discovered it around COVID is just an indication of how behind the times the federal government can be. Is there a real reason for people to actually go into an office in order to do what is essentially a data entry type of job, or to do customer service? And so there's actually a lot of money to be saved by allowing people to telecommute, number one. Number two, if you're into the environmental stuff, okay, again, Earth Day was yesterday, then it makes sense. Why wouldn't you support having people work from their homes? Now, in response to your question, Nick, how do you know people are doing the work? Well, you know people are doing the work just as well as you know they're doing the work when they're in the office, because it's a product type of environment. Okay, you don't have supervisors standing over people looking and going, "Why aren't you working on your computer?" You have output requirements, so people are able to measure the amount of work you're doing by the output. And here's the question, okay? Obviously, or here's the my observation is that obviously people are getting the job done as well as they were getting the job done when they were going into the offices, because the job has been getting done. Nobody's complaining that nothing is happening, with the exception of there were some issues where people actually have to get into a central place, passports, for instance, okay? So there are jobs that require you to be in a physical location, but many jobs, perhaps even most jobs right now in the public service, don't actually require that. And I'm not sure that I agree with all of the talk about how we have to get them back to work, because they have been working and they've clearly been working as well from home as they
Not
were
saying
working in
much.
the office, because if we hadn't, then we would know it, because nothing would
Well,
be getting
maybe in the
done.
government's point of
So
view, looking at the government point of view, them getting nothing done is a good thing. I do want to. I do want to ask you a couple questions, though. You mentioned money being saved. Okay, so where is it? If there is a lot of money to be saved,
well,
where is it? What are they doing with it? The
well,
second question, if
okay,
you
well,
now
you're
have all these people working from home, why do we need all these buildings? Like I think if I remember the number, it was like 14,000 federal buildings, many of them empty. Why don't we sell them? Turn them into low rent housing.
well, okay. So let's just
Sure.
let's just talk about that for a second. Okay, it's that's a great point. And I can't quantify, like I can't say this is how much money we've saved, because you have a whole budget. Okay, so I don't know what the line item is in the budget right now when it comes to reduction because of office space. In fact, I don't think that there has been a saving there, because the federal government has not divested itself of office space. But I do know for a fact that they are studying doing this. Now, here's the problem: it's every good thing comes along with a price to pay as well. So it's very easy to say, get rid of those offices, sell them, um, uh, uh, convert them into housing. And some of that's actually been done here in Ottawa already. But remember this, okay? The federal government pays the municipal government here in Ottawa a certain amount of money in lieu of taxes, because constitutionally, a one level of government can't pay certain taxes to another level of government. So without getting,
Yeah, I get
that's
it. Yeah.
complicated. We don't want to go down the rabbit hole. But what the federal government does do, and the provincial government does this as well, is that instead of paying property taxes to the municipal government, they make a grant to the municipal government that would be equal to what they would have paid in property taxes if it was constitutionally allowed for them to pay property taxes. That's called
Right.
payment in lieu of tax. Okay. All right. Or PILT for short. Here's the problem. The problem is that calculation is based on the property value. So if nobody's coming in and we have all of that empty space, and that is a real issue, at least here in Ottawa it is right now, then at some point in time when those properties go on the market, you're going to have a glut of properties on the market. The value of the properties is going to go down, as well as other properties around, and that will affect the amount of tax revenue that the municipal government can pick up. So it's not a simple thing, and it's because we've been so caught up in this particular system that when it starts to go awry, it has, it's all has a bit of a domino effect. So while we may save money federally, provincial and even provincially, on the municipal side, it's going to have potentially a very serious impact on our revenue. It's
Okay,
a
well, look,
complicated
I
area,
get that it's complicated,
but
but
the point
okay.
we have to go for a break, Nick. But just the point, just to leave us with before we come back, is it's forget about the finances for the time being. Remember, people are working, and the very fact that we haven't had a collapse in the federal government in terms of it fulfilling whatever its responsibilities are, whatever the tasks, whether you agree that they're necessary or not, clearly the job is still getting done, because otherwise we would know. So yeah, people are still working, and I'm not, I don't want to defend the public service in general, but I think that public servants deserve to be treated with just a little bit more respect on that particular front. Just because they're at home doesn't mean that they're not working, and they don't have to get into their cars or onto the LRT, and that's a whole different kettle of fish here in Ottawa, as you very well know.
Yeah, I got more
Let's just take
questions
a
about
break.
that, but we'll
2
come
minutes.
back to it
Back
after
in
the
2
break.
minutes. Okay.
All right, it's the Nick and Joe show, folks. Thanks for sticking with us. Just as a little technical piece of behind the scenes information, my private chat isn't working. I try to type in it, and so if you're making, I see your comments, but for some
Okay.
reason it's giving me grief. I can't respond. Anyway, I did have some questions about what we were just talking about. Number one, first of all, as far as the financial thing, yes, it's complicated. But the very first thing that pops to my mind, especially with these buildings that are standing empty now, sell them to the private sector, and you will be able to generate lost revenue by them paying property taxes on those buildings. Yeah, well,
At some
okay,
point in time,
fine,
yeah.
but I mean that's one way. Exactly how that will play out, I don't know, but it makes sense to me. The other question is, we're talking about working from home. That means they don't have to commute, they don't have to park, they don't have to buy gas, all these things. So how do they justify then this massive increase in wages?
Well,
It is.
that's a
Why
separate
not?
issue, and on that, I agree with you on that, Nick. I do think that the wage requests are excessive
Yes.
on the face of it. But I can't help but make the observation, Nick, that we're in an inflationary period. We are all paying higher taxes, and the point that you're making, okay, uh, the point that you're making about cost of living and everybody else caught up in that issue, we're all in the same boat. So why should public servants be entitled to have a much larger raise than people in the private sector may be
Very good
entitled to or
question.
may be able to get? Okay, and that's a fair question. There is for sure an element of equity and fairness in that question, in this whole debate. But let's not lose sight of the fact that there is a government that is responsible for policies that are causing the cost of living to skyrocket. And I'm not just talking, I'm talking about taxes and the
Yep.
fact that we pay more for just about everything because of taxes. And, not to beat the dead horse, so to speak, but I can't let the occasion pass without once again pointing out the devastating effect of this carbon
Yeah, you and
pricing
I are
and
on
the
the same
carbon
page.
tax. Because with the carbon tax, not only are we paying an artificially high price for fuel, okay, but think about that for a second, ladies and gentlemen. Because when you go to your grocery store and you're going, what is wrong with this? What's going on with these fruits and vegetables that I have to pay so much more for? Well, a significant portion of that is because the people who have to drive the fruits and vegetables from the farm to the distribution center and from the distribution center back to the grocery stores have to pay for their fuel, and they have to pay for that carbon tax too. Now, that's only one thing, but there are so many things that we blame on inflation that actually come down to government policy, government regulation, and government taxation that gets built into the cost of producing, of transportation, etc. And people don't think that this is a tax problem. They think I'm going to the grocery store, I'm paying more for groceries. I know, and it's shocking, Nick, that politicians themselves fall into that trap. So hence we have a parliamentary committee that's going to subpoena the head of Sobeys, the head of Loblaws, okay, the head of whatever other grocery chain, to rake them through the coal, okay, drag them through the mud because prices of groceries are going up, as if they're just raising money or raising prices arbitrarily. They don't. Politicians need to focus on what's under their control. And what's under their control are the taxes and regulations. And if you want to control price increases in groceries, you have to get your revenue, you have to get your taxes right. And we're not doing that now. And it's so easy for the federal government, for Mr. Trudeau and the Liberal Party, and for all of those people out there that are pro carbon tax, it's so easy for them to implement that and then wash their hands of inflation. Well, that's just inflation. That's not us. I saw this before. We went through the same things in the 70s and 80s, where the federal government was starved for revenue. They were running massive deficits. They had to raise taxes. They had to raise revenue. So what they would do is they would raise not the provincial sales tax, not the provincial sales tax, but the federal sales taxes. Everybody thinks the GST was a new federal sales tax. It wasn't. It was replacing existing
tax.
federal sales taxes. Manufacturer's tax. That in some cases that I saw in some cases, there was one tax that on manufactured goods that went in the space of 12 months went from 6% to 12.5%. And that caused the prices of goods and services that were attached to the manufactured goods to go up. But nobody ever realized that it was taxes that was causing that price to go up. And that's not real inflation. Real inflation has to do with the
Right. And
value of
I
the
look,
currency.
I remember that it was the manufacturer's tax that Brian Mulroney scrapped. His mistake was he broke the GST out. The replacement was the GST, and he pulled that so it was, instead of hidden in the cost, it was broken out and you could see it on your bill. And originally it was,
Well, that wasn't a mistake. That was
no, it was a
brilliant.
mistake, a
The
political
problem, of
point,
course, was it
because
was
they used it as
well,
ammunition. Look at this new tax. It wasn't that nobody bothered to ask, well, really,
okay,
is it a new tax? And it was 9%. Then got
okay.
cut to 7, and here we are. But
Bad.
it's been a flogging horse for a long
It was
time.
badly. It was badly. It was
Yes.
badly rolled out.
Yes.
I will grant you that. But the fact that the tax, the GST, was now federal sales tax was now up front and center in front of people, and they were getting angry about it. That very fact has prevented the federal government from raising the sales tax, okay, because they know that people will not stand for it. So what's happened
Well, why
is,
do they
in a
stand for
very
this?
real sense, the GST has been very
So why do
successful
they
in that
stand for
regard.
the carbon tax then?
But now what's happened is we have these other hidden taxes that the federal government now is
Why is it,
implementing.
Joseph, that, because you're right, I agree with you, but why is it people will blow a gasket over the GST? And I'm not defending the GST. I think lowering taxes overall is beneficial to everybody. Okay, not that we don't pay any tax, but we pay way too much tax, so lowering it is a good idea. But how come they'll blow a gasket over the GST, but the carbon tax, they don't, there's a disconnect. They don't understand that every time you make fuel more
Because
expensive or energy more expensive, everything goes up. And yet people think, well, it was going to save the
because
planet. Yeah. Tell me how that works.
no, but because Nick, because you don't see
Yeah,
the
every time you
carbon
pull up to the
tax.
pump, you see
You
it.
see the price of
You don't see a number,
no,
but
you know it's there. You know it's there, but it's not like an item on your bill.
yeah,
It's built in. And that has a tremendous psychological effect. It's part of the price. The GST, when you see GST, you don't think that's part of the price. That's tax
that's
I have
right.
to pay on top of the price. Okay. So I'm a very big believer. If you're going to put taxes, the taxes should always be
Absolutely.
totally
I couldn't agree
transparent.
with you more, Joseph, because this, like, I notice it every time the price of fuel goes up. The price recently dropped on
No,
crude oil by about 2%, but they brought the carbon tax in, so fuel went up anyway, even though the cost of manufacturing went down.
you want to have a tax rebellion in this country, Nick? I'll tell you how you do it. Okay, you go to and I don't know why fuel companies, why petrol companies, gasoline stations, and that, I don't know why they don't do this. What they should do is they should charge for the actual cost of the gasoline. That's what the invoice should be. When you pay, let's say you pay, I don't know, 50
Pick your
cents,
number.
50
Yeah.
cents for a liter of gas. Pick your number. And then on top of that, plus 75 cents, or more than that now, it's plus $1 something in taxes. Let people see, on top of the cost of what they're buying, how much the
Well,
government
this
is
is
charging in
one of the things
taxes.
that Doug Ford did that I actually liked. Now, I'm no fan of Doug Ford. He's been a disaster, but he put a sticker on every pump in Ontario and showed how much the tax was going to be in any given year.
Yeah,
Yeah, you're
not
right.
good
It
enough.
didn't go far enough. I think he should have done exactly what you just said, made it the law of the land.
It should be illegal to build taxes into the price of goods and services. The consumer should have the right to pay the price, to pay the cost of whatever they're purchasing. And if they have to pay tax on top of that, then it should show as an extra tax on top of whatever they've purchased. And then we know. Now, don't hold me accountable. Don't be upset with me at the gas station because you're paying $1.65 a liter at the pump. Don't get angry at me. I'm just paying you. You're just paying your taxes, and then you'll have people like what's his name,
Jean-Serge Brisson.
Serge Jean-Serge Brisson, who's going to come and say, "Hey, I'm not collecting that tax."
Yeah.
And you'll see, people will start to see how much they're
Yeah.
actually paying in
And
taxes.
look, we got to take a break, but you're absolutely right. And that's the
Yeah.
way to do it. It's not going to happen, but that's the way to do it.
Unfortunately. Well, there's nothing it's all it takes
Well.
is political will. Okay? There's no law
Yeah.
against it. All right, we'll be back in a couple of minutes here on the Nick and Joe show. Don't go away.
Who says you can't turn the clock back? Experience the excitement of open-air flying and see Canada's National Capital Region like you've never seen it before from the open cockpit of a vintage 1930s biplane. Are you up for the adventure? Put on your helmet and goggles and strap yourself in. Book your flight today. Go to OttawaBiplaneAdventures.com. That's OttawaBiplaneAdventures.com. Ottawa Biplane Adventures. The adventure begins here.
Oh my gosh, that was so exciting! I gotta do it again.
We all know that climate change is real. But with countries like China and India failing to do their part, what Canadians need now more than ever is a Made in Canada climate change plan. A real plan that responds to the real-world needs of Canadians. A balanced plan that supports responsible economic growth and strengthens our essential infrastructure. A responsible plan that protects our natural environment and ensures that all Canadians enjoy the blessings of clean air, clean land, and clean water for generations to come. It's time for Canadian politicians to show real leadership in the world, putting partisanship and ideology aside. It's time for a sensible climate plan. We're the International Climate Science Coalition Canada, and we're ready to help. To learn more, visit our website, icsc-canada.com.
Who says you can't turn the clock back? Experience the excitement of open-air flying and see Canada's National Capital Region like you've never seen it before from the open cockpit of a vintage 1930s biplane. Are you up for the adventure? Put on your helmet and goggles and strap yourself in. Book your flight today. Go to OttawaBiplaneAdventures.com. That's OttawaBiplaneAdventures.com. Ottawa Biplane Adventures. The adventure begins here.
Oh my gosh, that was so exciting! I gotta do it again.
I'll tell you, Nick, what we so badly in this country need a tax revolt. I'm not talking about pitchforks and
I get you.
torches and storming, but I look at the protests a year ago here in Ottawa around the COVID restrictions, the vaccinations, etc. And I have to say that I think that those protests played an important role in deterring the government from continuing the restrictions, okay, or imposing new restrictions. And I think that they absolutely accelerated the removal of restrictions. Okay. Having said that, I cannot for the life of me understand why people so docilely, so sheepishly pay money through the nose to go for the government, and with all of the kind of waste and silliness that goes on around this, and there isn't a single protest. Forget about a protest on the level of the convoy last year. Just any protest. There are no tax protests in this country, and I think part of the reason is I just don't think that people really appreciate how
Well-
much they're paying in taxes. And as Nick, I'm not anti-government. The government has an important role to play, and if you're going to have government, you have to pay taxes. Fair enough. Okay, but Good
I think
grief.
part of the answer to your question is that they've been sold, the Canadian taxpayer has been sold a bill of goods that says, if you pay me X amount of dollars in your taxes, me being the government, I will provide health care. I will provide, and healthcare is the big thing. Let's face it, because as soon as you mention tax cuts, oh, what? So we're going to lose our health care. I didn't say that. Are you telling me we don't spend enough on health care? Maybe what we need is a cleaning out of the healthcare system and get rid of the heels on the high offices and make sure the money goes down to the front line where it belongs. Maybe that's a conversation we could have. I'm not against healthcare. I mean, if we as a country want to have socialized medicine, I don't like it, but majority is supposed to rule, and the majority would want that. So the point I'm making is that they have bought into this eternal lie, and every year it takes more and more and more and more until you get to a point where two people living together cannot live on one income. They both have to work, and that has ramification go way beyond economics. It has social ramification, it has family ramifications, it has ramifications for unity within the country, because some regions feel like they're being overtaxed, others feel like they're entitled, and it just tears up at the fabric of the country. And they buy into this stuff because there's so much going on. I'm not even going to accuse them of intellectual laziness, although that's true in a lot of cases. They just have never thought about it because that's the way it always has been. No, didn't always used to have been. You just haven't been alive long enough to know when it wasn't like that. So you look at it now, and people, it's like that old frog in the frying pan. How do you cook a frog in a frying pan? You put them in cold water, turn it on slowly, and the heat comes up. Before long, you got cooked frog. And frog never makes a squeak in protest. This is the same kind of mentality. It's incrementalism at its finest. And too many people are so busy or not, they've become so apathetic and so jaded that they don't want to engage in the mental gymnastics necessary to walk it back and say, well, what if we didn't do this? Or what if we took another route? You know, they're safe, the devil you know versus the devil you don't. And that's, I think, big part of it.
And you know, just circling back to healthcare, I'd be, but I could make the statement with regard to a whole range of public services. Here we are going into further and further debt every single year as a country, and I can't even get the services properly delivered that I'm paying for.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? It's not. You can't. You say, well, we have to be able to provide healthcare, and I go, well, yeah, but we're not.
Yeah,
we're not, and not only are we not providing it properly, I should say, okay, but we're going into
so we're
debt
getting
more and more.
poorer quality health care,
So
and it's becoming more expensive.
It's madness.
Yeah.
It's madness. And we're not even allowed to tinker with our healthcare model in order to find ways to improve the service and provide it at a more reasonable cost.
Why is it okay to run pilot projects in dozens of different areas, but not here? Why don't they take make a pilot project about simply allowing a philanthropist, and there are still a few in the country who would do this, to buy an MRI machine, attach it to a hospital, pay to have it staffed, and see what the results are compared to a fully publicly funded, where that's not possible, scenario, and run them side by side and see which one performs better.
I have been calling for that for a long time. There are certain things that we could keep our public health care system the way it is right now, okay, single payer, and just have hospitals converted into not-for-profit charitable institutions,
like they used to be,
which they are already, but only on certain types of donations going to certain projects. So allow those donations to go to providing front line medical care. I think that that's a very simple thing to do. It in no way endangers. It's not even a fundamental reform of the way that the system operates. It's just allowing hospitals to have a sensible alternative revenue stream. For the life of me, I do not understand why we do not allow that. Just
Yeah,
that simple
I
thing.
agree with you.
I want to make one. I want to make one other comment. You know, we're talking about hidden taxes and that, and we were talking before the break, Nick, about the GST
Yep.
and everything. But here's another thing that I hesitate to use the term scam. We got scammed, okay? But when we went from the GST and PST, the goods and services tax, the federal sales tax, plus the provincial sales tax
Yep.
here in Ontario, and it was the
They
same way
blended
in
the
other
two.
jurisdictions as well, but just focus on Ontario, okay? All of a sudden, when we blended them together, all of a sudden, that 8% that was being applied to certain goods, not services, but goods in Ontario, applied across the board because the GST was an across the board tax. So just suddenly, here in Ontario, it was a massive tax grab,
Well, that's why they did it.
and nobody said
But
anything
again,
about it.
I go back to my earlier argument of why they didn't. They have this mentality: if I pay more taxes, I maintain my health care, and they don't pay any attention to people like you who say, "Wait a minute, the health quality of health is going down and the price is going up.
So-
There's something wrong." You would never accept that in any other area. Why are you willing to accept it now? I don't have an answer to that. You know, it blows my mind.
There's something psychological going on here, and you know, Nick, I have to say this, and you know, I've said this on my own show a few times, and you know, it doesn't go over well, but I'm going to say it again on this show, and that is, you know, it's very easy for us to blame
Yeah.
liberals and to blame the left and blame politicians, but ultimately, we live in a democracy, and if the people, the voters, are not willing to make their voice heard at the ballot box on these questions, then you know, don't complain about it. And I know there are a lot of people out there that vote are concerned about these
Right.
things and they vote accordingly, but most
Yeah.
people don't. Most people don't, and even people who are going to say, "Well, we have to get rid of the liberal government and vote in a conservative government with the new leader, Pierre Poilievre." Okay, well, that's great, but what are you going to do if the conservatives are not going to follow through on some of their promises? And I'll say this much as well. I don't hear a whole lot coming from the Conservative Party right now, federally, on healthcare reform, allowing healthcare reform. I don't hear it really. There's a little bit of a little bit of adjustment, a little bit of tinkering here provincially with it comes to, you know, we were talking about hockey, okay? It comes to, there's too much of my team versus the other team and not enough holding politicians and our political parties accountable for getting the problems solved.
Well, to be fair, and when you ask, you raise a very valid point, but who's asking the question in the first place? There's nobody in the media saying to anybody, how are you going to fix healthcare? Nobody's asking that question. When's the last time you heard a reporter ask that question of any politician?
Well,
I can't remember the last time.
well,
So if you don't ask,
but we just went through a whole series of meetings and that, and we've come up with agreements between the federal government and the provincial governments on healthcare.
yeah,
And
fine.
on new funding for healthcare. But that's
Yeah.
always the answer, isn't it? It's always
Yes,
the
it
same
is.
answer. More money. We need more money, more money, more money.
Well, until you can show me that the last money made a difference, why would I give you more? Is my answer.
But it's always the federal government and the provincial government. And that just burns me up too, Nick, because everybody says, well, we have to get more money from the federal government. Okay, no, because you're not getting more money from the federal government. You're getting more money from me. It's
Right.
not the federal government's money. And it doesn't matter whether it's the municipal government or the provincial government or the federal government. It's me. I'm the only taxpayer. You, Nick, you're the only taxpayer. Our listeners and our viewers out there, you people are the only taxpayer. It's your money.
You want to run an interesting poll? Is to run a poll that the question is simple. Where does the government get the money that it spends? And see what you kind of answers you get back. It will
Okay.
blow your mind how many people think they own that money.
Okay, Nick. Break time.
Yes,
Break
it
time.
is.
Don't go away, ladies and gentlemen. We'll be back in a minute.
We all know that climate change is real. But with countries like China and India failing to do their part, what Canadians need now more than ever is a Made in Canada climate change plan. A real plan that responds to the real-world needs of Canadians. A balanced plan that supports responsible economic growth and strengthens our essential infrastructure. A responsible plan that protects our natural environment and ensures that all Canadians enjoy the blessings of clean air, clean land, and clean water for generations to come. It's time for Canadian politicians to show real leadership in the world, putting partisanship and ideology aside. It's time for a sensible climate plan. We're the International Climate Science Coalition Canada, and we're ready to help. To learn more, visit our website, icsc-canada.com.
All right. Now, good Lord, we could go on for hours on this, but there is another topic I want to bring up, and that is it kind of ties in with the strike. But Justin Trudeau told NATO that Canada would never meet its defense spending targets, which is 2% of our GDP. It's 1.5 or 2%. It's a very small number.
2%.
Is it 2%? I thought so.
Yeah.
Anyway, the point is, I can't understand. Look, I have said for years that the Liberals only use the military when it suits them. They put it up on a shelf and they want it to look nice. And if they need it, they take it down, they dust it off, they use it for their photo ops and for their, make them look good. Then they put it back up on the shelf and ignore it for another 30 years. That's been the cycle for as long as I can remember. And to hear him actually come out, maybe it's a moment of honesty. At least he's being honest about what his intentions are. So I'll give him that. But it is an absolute national disgrace. We have people in Latvia. We have people in Poland. We have people in several different corners of the world. We have people in the Navy going who knows where. We have people in the Air Force doing who knows what, all requiring modernization, upgrading. The missile defense system that they bought for the Army that went to Latvia was supposed to go to Canada. They haven't had the ability to defend themselves in the Canadian Army from air attack for 20 years at least. And Trudeau decides, we don't need it. Let's give it to the Ukrainians. Well, what about our guys? It shows an absolute total disrespect and disregard for the people whose job it is to keep us safe when the defecation hits the rotary oscillator. How is this any different than the situation we ended up in? I'm trying to be polite.
Yes.
When in 1939, the Canadian Navy had 3,600 people, 6 warships, and a handful of auxiliary vessels. We had no aircraft carriers, we had no submarines, we had no destroyers of any kind. Oh well, they were older destroyers, but no frigates, none of that stuff. And at the end of the war, we turned around, we were the 3rd largest Navy in the world. But it took a war to get us there. We are not going to have that kind of time. And to watch him just absolutely come out and say this stuff, oh my God, it's such a slap in the face to everybody who ever wore the uniform.
Well, yeah. Well, it's funny because I have to say, Nick, in kind of a twisted way, you have to give the guy some degree of credit because he at least he's being honest.
Well, that's what I said when I started.
Okay, at least he's being honest. Okay,
Yes.
can we stop lying to ourselves and our allies? This this issue has been going on for well more than one generation now.
Well, since Lester
And
B.
and
Pearson,
it really accelerated under Trudeau the
Trudeau,
elder.
right? Trudeau 1.0.
Okay, but it's we don't take our military seriously, and that's unfortunate because when it comes to defense spending, people just don't understand that it's not just about fighting wars. Okay, it's the military in this country performs so many important functions on a day-to-day basis.
That's right.
The Air Force does search and rescue, as does the Navy. Both the Air Force and the Navy collaborate in
Drug interdiction and coastal patrol.
drug interdiction, environmental protection,
Right.
etc.
Well,
The
remember the big ice storm of 90, was it
Right, that was
92?
I was just going to say the
Yeah.
Army is always there year in and year out, helping defend communities against flooding, and they're there to respond to natural disasters. And I remember a number of years ago we were debating whether or not we should purchase heavy lift aircraft, and interestingly enough, I was doing your favorite radio station here in Ottawa, CFRA. So I happened to be on a guest on the Lunch Bunch on at one day, and we were talking about this, and I was pointing out. I said, it sounds like it's an extravaganza, and they're going, yeah, well, what are we going to do? We're going to ship our tanks to Europe on an emergency basis, and now given the
Turns out
situation
that's
we're in
exactly
now,
what we did.
that's exactly what we need. But it was at that time I said, what happens if there's an earthquake in Vancouver, and we have to find a way to get in a very quick way heavy lifting equipment out to the West Coast to save lives. That's the kind of thing that our armed forces does. This country is immense. It's
Well,
the second largest country in the world. You have to have the capacity to be able to respond to natural disasters in a
well, this
country the
is no
size of Canada.
mountaintop country, that's for sure. And look at the yeoman's work. These galaxies that the C-117s, I think they're called, have been doing since they've been purchased. They have not been sitting idle.
No,
These things get a lot of work.
so understand. We started the show tonight talking about the responsibility of the government to provide transportation infrastructure in Northern Ontario. That was the example. We were pointing at Northern Ontario as an example of the failure of the government to provide adequate infrastructure. Well, the military is the same thing. It's
Yes,
all part of the same malaise.
it is one of
Uh,
their core functions.
and I just but Canadians, I don't think understand the importance of having a properly equipped, trained, functional military, whether you're talking Air Force, Navy, or Army.
Well, I
And
remember during our time in Afghanistan, the the country fell in love with this military because we were punching way above our weight, as we always do. And I remember saying to some of the people within the military during that time, enjoy this now because this will not last.
right,
This will fade. And guess what? Nobody's paying. Petawawa, CB Petawawa. I have a son who's in the military, and he was telling me, and I've read other reports as well in the different media outlets, that 700 homes, some PMQs, were without basic water and heat services because when these people went on strike, the people who ran the heating plant were not deemed essential. So they walked off the job. What kind of nonsense is that? You're talking about I'm not trying to make heroes and angels and saints out of the military, but they are performing a task most of us don't have the courage to do, to put their lives on the line in a very literal sense at the whim of a government. And that takes a certain amount of courage to do all by itself. So these people housed in Petawawa went without hot water and heat. I don't know if it's back on yet. I haven't had a chance to talk to my son about it, whether he was affected, because not every house on it was affected. I'm sure they have more than one heating plant. But the fact this happened at all, did nobody stop and think, well, if we do this, what's going to be the consequences of the people in uniform on this and who knows how many other, well, yeah, who knows how many other bases? Because they're all civilian contractors now. There's no stoker in the boiler room firing up the boiler to make sure that the place stays warm. So it's just frustrating. It's just really frustrating. And there's also
I want to say though, Nick, I think this is again, looking for solutions to these problems. I think that the first step to finding a solution to this problem, it has to be communications. That we have to be able to communicate in an effective way to the public, to taxpayers, the importance and the benefit of having a properly trained and equipped military. And we have not done that in this country. And that's, part of that may be the fault of the communications departments in the armed forces, but I tend to give them a pass because I don't think that necessarily your men and women in uniform ought to be dabbling in the political side of this, and that is politics. But where is the Legion?
Where is the
for instance?
media?
Well, I know, but you're not wrong, Nick. But we have organizations in this country that are not government-run organizations that I think have a responsibility to get out there and to educate people. Where are these organizations? And I don't mean to pick on the Legion, but
per
I would
se.
say that the Legion has to be one of them.
Yeah, for sure.
But there are others. There's the Canadian Association of Defense Industries. There are groups out there, but they just don't do a very good job. And I don't think that they see it as their responsibility necessarily.
You know something? If CBC wanted to make a case for itself, it would become the voice advocate for the military. To be a government-run organization or a government-funded organization that stands up for the military and let their reporters ask any question they want without worrying about the consequences. Won't happen. But when I was on the air, I went to the military, and then this is what was frustrating. And I would go and meet with a public affairs officer who got posted into Ottawa at NDHQ. And I would tell him, say, look, I'm the only guy in Ottawa who understands what you're trying to accomplish. I'm the only one with service time that I know of in the media. I am your best friend. Tell me what's going on. Tell me, keep me informed, send me notices. Let's sit down once a week and have coffee. Anything, whatever it takes, so that I can tell your story on a platform you can't. Because the media in general will not pick up these stories. They just don't care. If you want people to care, you first have to tell the story.
Right.
Which is part of the reason I did answer the call.
Right.
Was to try to generate an interest in our military.
Right.
Not only its past, but what's going on now. And every single time, about 4 times in a row, I go, what the heck happened to Lieutenant Jones? Oh, he got posted Yellowknife. Well, why didn't he tell me? Why didn't you make me part of his in routine? Now I got a new guy I got to learn all about. And it was so frustrating because I wanted to do that. And then I'm only one guy, on a radio station in one city in the country. But what's wrong with having the media, where's Rebel on this? Where is the National Post on this? You know, why aren't they standing up saying we need to educate
Well-
people about this stuff?
Well, Nick, all I can say is, just think about how we've complained about how lazy the media is in this country, the state of journalism, and not just in this country, but quite frankly, right around the world. But in this country in particular, it's a crying shame. Got to go for a break.
Yep.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, stick with us. We'll be back in 2 minutes.
All right. We are in the home stretch. We got another half hour to go. I'm Nick. He's Joseph. We are broadcasting from different locations. One is way the heck up in the northwest corner of Ontario. That's not where he is. That's where I am, up in a little place called Sioux Lookout, and he's not well. All right. Look, I get passionate about this topic because I understand that of all the things a country can ask of you, this is the greatest. To be willing to lay down your very life in defense of everything that we believe in. And when I watch governments simply deride, ridicule, disrespect, or ignore the people who make that sacrifice willingly, voluntarily. Canada is a completely voluntary organization, or Canada's military is. And it's just so frustrating to me because we would have much more prominence on the world stage if we actually had something to back up what our words, like, you know, that old saying, walk softly but carry a big stick. That would work for me. You know, do we need to have a military the size of the US? No, but we need one bigger than we have. I don't think there's any doubt of that. So I get passionate about it, and it drives me crazy when I hear some of the nonsense that's going on, because first of all, I was involved in that like you were, and when I was a much younger man, and that vow that I took all the way back in 1980, I still cling to. I still think it applies. Now I can't exercise and implement that vow the way I would have done back then, but that doesn't mean I'm going to stand quietly by and watch the military that I have such this deep abiding passion for be torn apart for political and social reasons. And that's what drives me crazy.
Well, this is almost like a Canadian tradition, though, Nick. We've gone through periods of time where, obviously, you know, like your show, was titled "Canadians Answered the Call,"
Mhm.
but in between those periods when there was a critical need for Canadians to answer the call, you know, not a lot of them do, and the ones that don't really care. And I guess that's just part of the Canadian sort of psyche. It's you know, it's a thread that winds its way through so many of the topics that we have touched on tonight in particular, but that we talk about in general. Look, I what can I say? Um, Last week, the government in British Columbia released a report on deaths attributed to drugs,
Yep.
illicit drugs.
Fentanyl.
Not just fentanyl, just we'll
No,
say
no, I
illicit
get it,
drugs,
but
okay?
fentanyl's one of the
Fentanyl
big
being
ones.
one of them.
Yep.
That in the first 3 months in British Columbia, in the first 3 months of 2023, almost 600 people have died as a result of their use of these illicit drugs. And those are only the reported deaths as a result, and they're deaths, not overdoses, they're not or anything like that. Okay, why am I saying this? Because the response of the government now is, or the response that we're hearing from people out there is, well, we now that we have succeeded in having the federal government give us a waiver on criminal prosecution of people who have drugs for their own personal use, now let's focus on the quality of the drugs. So what we need to do is we need to ensure that the people are getting drugs that are addicted are getting drugs and it's safe. So what is this leading to? It's leading to another government program.
Yep.
Where now what we're going to do is we're going to buy, and there's no concrete plan to do this yet, so nobody should be
Give them time.
okay. But give it time. This is the direction we're going. Okay, we mark today is April 23rd, 2023. Mark that date on your calendar, because 5 years from now we'll look back on this and they're going to say, "Yeah, you see, we told you so." This is, but our governments are willing to spend piles and piles of money on this kind of stuff. But
Well-
but they're not going to spend extra, but they won't meet their commitments to our allies. And one more point about this, Nick. It's not just that they're not paying attention to the need for a properly equipped and trained military. It's that they're making commitments. They've made commitments to their allies. We have made commitments. This is a treaty. Now, why is it? Why do we not feel that we have an obligation to meet the terms of the contract that we've entered into with other countries for the collective defense?
In any other-
There's an element here of fundamental lack of integrity that we would make such a solemn and important commitment and then just shrug our shoulders and say, we're still committed to it, but it'll never happen.
In any other scenario, they would consider that a breach of contract and we would get our butts thrown out. They're not going to throw us out of NATO.
No, of course not.
But from in a theoretical point of view, they could. If they wanted to say, look, if you can't meet your commitments, you got no business being here. It's like saying to your landlord, well, I'm never going to pay the full amount for rent. I'm never going to. Then he has every right to say, well, then I guess you're going to have to find someplace to live, sell someplace else to live, because you either pay the rent that we agreed on, that you said you could pay and you promised to pay, or the contract is in violation and therefore you're out the door. So
Mm-hmm.
from a theoretical point, they would have a very strong legal case to do that. I
And
know
and
they're
and
not going to
and,
do
and
that.
when it comes to paying your rent or getting evicted in this country these days, that is very theoretical.
Yes, it is, because even in that case, it's not necessarily guaranteed. I do want to move on to another topic, one that you mentioned, and you've brought issues like this up before, or instances. One happened to you and your family personally, but down in Windsor, tell us a story about this woman who was this guy dressed as a woman who went into a woman's shelter and got arrested.
Right. Well, it's happening more with greater and greater frequency. But last week there was well, it didn't happen last week. I think it was on April the 4th. There was an incident in a women's shelter in Windsor where a woman who was in the shelter was sexually assaulted by one of the other people in the shelter, by the name of Desiree Anderson, and which would never have raised anybody's eyebrows, except that the story was Desiree Anderson, aka Cody D'Entremont. Ching! Little red flag goes up. Okay, so some of us are going, Cody? Like, first of all, whoever does this, okay? Desiree, aka. I mean, really, you're naming the person and then you're giving us an alias? What of the alleged perpetrator? So I guess some intrepid reporters actually did ask the police the question about this individual, his gender, and the police response was that the individual presents as a woman and identifies as a woman, and therefore is being processed and identified as a woman.
You
And
know what I would
words to
ask
that
if I was
effect.
the reporter? What's a woman?
Okay.
Define that.
I
How
know.
can you process somebody if you can't even define it?
It's all they don't have to define it because you get to define it yourself.
Well,
It's the ultimate Descartes. Um, uh, uh, um, what's the word I'm looking for here? Vengeance. Okay, I think, therefore I am.
oh brother.
Anyway, look, I'm laughing at this because but really I shouldn't be laughing because it's quite tragic. There was another instance of this is not the first time this has happened, by the way. And so you see now men moving into women's shelters, and for what reason? Not because they're being abused. There's no abused wives here. Okay, so it's an opportunity for them to get into a shelter, and unfortunately, it seems to be an opportunity for predators to have access to vulnerable women.
Absolutely.
And this it's appalling, and it's not epidemic, but it's happening on a regular basis. And there have been some cases now where individuals have been identified as doing this chronically and knowing how to play the system in order to be able to get into some of these women's shelters. So, we have a situation now where we have uh, people, transgendered people, or people, and it's not even, here's the thing, is it's not even transgendered people. It's people who are basically saying, I feel like a woman, and making that declaration. And that declaration alone is sufficient criteria for being allowed, not just to be allowed into some of these facilities, but that you must allow them to come into the facility. And there's no objective criteria. There's no you don't have to present any kind of a doctor's letter or anything like that. You just have to make a declaration. And it's the same thing when it comes to women's change rooms, okay, or women's bathrooms. And as I said, it's very nice to say, well, okay, well, we're all adults, but what do you have a situation where you have family swims in a public pool, and you have young girls that are being exposed to fat, ugly males. Not to put too fine a point on it, okay?
That's
I mean,
scary enough.
It's traumatic for them, and nobody seems to be caring about this. And the minute you raise the question, you're accused of being transphobic. You're accused of promoting hatred or whatever. And I'm going, no. I look. I'll say this, okay? When the bill passed, I can't remember the name of it. Was, I think it was C-13 or whatever it was back in 2016 or 2017. There were those of us who were saying, this is what's going to happen because the bill didn't define what it meant to be transgendered. Okay, it used language like gender identification. Okay, and that kind of thing. So there was no definition, and as a consequence, we were saying, okay, this is what's going to happen. Somebody's going to come in. They're going to say, I feel like a woman today, okay, and gender expression, that was what it was. It was gender expression
yes,
was the
that's
phrase that was used. And so, therefore, how do we stop them from going into these public places? And the answer is, you can't. And when we raised the issue, everybody was scoffing us. Oh, that'll never happen. That'll never happen. Oh, yeah?
Well, guess
Well,
what?
it's happening.
It did.
Just like
And we-
it'll never happen that we're going to have assisted suicide, euthanasia, for people who are not terminally ill. Well,
All right.
wake up and smell the coffee, people. A few years later,
Here we
that's
are.
what we have now. And it's
Okay.
only going to get worse.
We need to take a break.
And unfortunately, we need to take a break. So
That's
we'll be
right.
back in just 1 minute.
Who says you can't turn the clock back? Experience the excitement of open air flying and see Canada's national capital region like you've never seen it before from the open cockpit of a vintage 1930s biplane. Are you up for the adventure? Put on your helmet and goggles and strap yourself in. Book your flight today. Go to OttawaBiplaneAdventures.com. That's OttawaBiplaneAdventures.com. Ottawa Biplane Adventures. The adventure begins here.
Oh my gosh, that was so exciting! I gotta do it again.
We all know that climate change is real. But with countries like China and India failing to do their part, what Canadians need now more than ever is a Made in Canada climate change plan. A real plan that responds to the real-world needs of Canadians. A balanced plan that supports responsible economic growth and strengthens our essential infrastructure. A responsible plan that protects our natural environment and ensures that all Canadians enjoy the blessings of clean air, clean land, and clean water for generations to come. It's time for Canadian politicians to show real leadership in the world, putting partisanship and ideology aside. It's time for a sensible climate plan. We're the International Climate Science Coalition Canada, and we're ready to help. To learn more, visit our website, icsc-canada.com.
I was just looking at the image for the gentleman you were talking about before that tried to pass himself off as a woman. And I'm looking at the picture. It's in the Toronto Sun. This guy has a 5 o'clock shadow. It would take me 3 days to grow that.
Okay,
And
and if you scroll down, that particular story in the Toronto Sun, you'll see there's a picture of a fellow by the name of Shane Jacob Green.
I'm looking at it now. Yeah.
Okay, and he has been he's a convicted sex offender. Okay, in Parry Sound, and he identifies as a woman.
Yeah.
And he's been trying to get into women's shelters. So it's not, and there are workers who say, we know this guy, and he apparently, allegedly, okay, according to this report in the Toronto Sun, has figured out how to game the system, so to speak, so that he's able to get into shelters. And this is a serious problem. It's a
You know what?
problem. We
I'm
need
laughing
to
at it,
deal
but
with this.
and I think that you're beginning to see a backlash against this stuff, not only in the States, but here in Canada as well. Parents are starting to show up at school boards. There was one school board, I forgot, I just saw the headline in passing, get out of our schools, and they were throwing a drag queen out because they don't want their children, exposed to that, in grade 1 to 3 or whatever. They just don't want those people in their schools, which is completely legitimate. Um, so there's that. You more and more people are saying, wait a minute, this is really getting absurd when you can't even define what a woman is.
So let me just quote again. I'm going back to this article in the Toronto Sun, but let me just quote one law enforcement officials with respect to this fellow Green. Okay, quote: Green really seems to know how the shelter system works, and because it's 2022, and in the current climate, workers at the shelter feel they've lost that they have to let Green stay. End quote. Said one law enforcement source on condition of anonymity.
Well, isn't that nice?
This is but again, this is it is crazy. And this fellow, Shane Green, was convicted in 2018 of dragging a 15-year-old female McDonald's employer into a bathroom stall at one of the chain's eateries and attacking the victim. 15 years old. Now, let's make a statement here, a qualifying statement. We're not saying that everybody that is suffering from gender dysphoria we're not saying that everybody is doing this. Okay? But what we are saying is that it's happening enough, and we're allowing it to happen because of our confusion surrounding the whole subject of transgenderism, etc. And let me make it very clear. There is no reason why we have to allow males, irrespective of how they are expressing themselves and how they feel about themselves and their gender identity and all that stuff, biological males should never be allowed into a female change room, irrespective of all that stuff. And it's not disrespectful to anybody who's going through anything. We in our rush to prove that we have these human rights, we simply trample on the basic human rights of young girls.
Well,
in our
of the
society.
population
What are
at
we
large, if
coming
you
to,
don't.
Nick? What are we coming to in our society?
Well, that's something. There's not only is this egregious situation that you're doing a great job outlining, but it's broader than that. In the world of sports, this transgenderism is going to kill female sport. Look, the WNBA already has trouble attracting people because most people are not interested in female basketball, at the level of they are in the NBA. And it's the NBA that's been keeping them alive for the 10 years. If they've been losing like 10 or 15 million dollars a year since inception. So there's that. You have people who are swimming as females who are men biologically,
Right.
and trouncing the women. You've got the bodybuilder who did it to prove a point and crushed all their records in one thing. I watched a video clip of a young woman who's ripped. I mean, this woman was a bodybuilder and she deadlifted 250 pounds. That's a lot of weight. They got a 16-year-old boy, 16 or 17, skinny as a rake. He went over to the bars, picked it up himself. Now, it took everything he had to lift it, but he's only 16 and he looked like a pen. He wasn't massively muscled. In other words, as I heard one guy say on a podcast once, a 14-year-old boy could mess up just about any woman that he chooses to engage if he took the gloves off and was serious about it. There are differences between men and women, and this transgenderism is trying to ignore and override that and allow men mostly to compete in areas they would never stand a chance in, and it's undermining women's athletics. It's providing threats within change rooms. There's all this stuff is all wrapped up in it, and I, for the life of me, cannot understand why people don't just stand up and say, enough. You're not going to be able to do this. Sooner or later, we have to use that 1-2-letter word that everybody understands. No.
Well, I understand the concern in female sports, and I naturally I share those concerns. But for me, when it comes to girls, teenagers in our change rooms, when it comes to vulnerable, abused women in a shelter,
Oh yeah,
for me, it's on a completely different level.
I wasn't
For
trying
me,
to
it's
say that
visceral.
the two are the same, by the way.
No, I'm not accusing you of that, Nick. I'm just reiterating how deeply I feel about this.
Yeah.
There is something fundamentally wrong in our society and with our government and our elected officials, the leaders of our communities, that they go along with this. I'm beside myself, Nick. I cannot find the words to adequately convey my level of distress that we are allowing this to happen and somehow and applauding. There are people out there that are applauding the fact that we allow this to happen in our society now. Again, I'm not accusing people who are transgender of any of this. It's not a blanket accusation, but surely to goodness, if we had one bottle of Tylenol out of millions of bottles of Tylenol, if we had one or two in one drugstore somewhere in the country that turned out to be tainted, we'd be pulling all of those bottles off the shelves until we figured out what was going on.
Yep. Absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more.
And so that's all I'm saying. Okay, it's enough already. It's time for us to revisit this particular piece of legislation, to look carefully at it and say, okay, you know what? Maybe we've gone too far. We've just we need to find a way to control this a little bit better.
Yeah. Look, you and I are exactly on the same page. I'm only saying that it's infected every area of life, not just the threat to vulnerable women, which is a very serious thing, but it's in sports, it's in all kinds of things. And what I'm really delighted in is companies now learning to adapt the phrase, if you go woke, you go broke. And when they promote this kind of stuff, they suffer. And if you don't believe me, just ask Bud Light. All right. Well, guess what that means? Oh, one more moment. We got about 1 minute left. How did you spend Earth Day, Joseph? I went around setting car tires on fire. Maybe not, but
this is how I spent Earth Day.
Just like this. It's a good way to spend it.
I spent Earth Day not even realizing that it was Earth Day.
That's how important it is.
That's how important it is to me.
I just thought I'd ask. I mean, oh man, I would love for somebody to ask, so how'd you spend Earth Day? Well, I lit about 6 car tires on fire. Had put all that CO2 back in the air. Anyway. All right. That pretty much wraps it up for Joseph and I. I want to thank you all for joining us this evening. Hope you enjoyed the show. Don't be afraid to drop us a comment in the appropriate place, the chat box or whatever over on YouTube where it's being broadcast. In the comment section is the phrase I was looking for.
The nickandjoeshow.com. Check it out.
That's right. Check that out. And tell your friends, tell your enemies. We like them both. All right. And so I guess we'll see you all again next Sunday at the same time. In the meantime, Ubiqueritas et amor, Deus sibi est. Good evening. God bless. Don't let anything disturb your peace. And may you have a fair wind and a following sea.